It's Thursday, September 4th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, dozens of the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell held a press conference pleading with lawmakers and the president to pass a piece of legislation to release the Epstein Files. It was a moving press conference yesterday. At times, it was harrowing, as some of the victims recounted how they were groomed and trafficked and forced to live in fear for years. So you're going to hear from those survivors in this episode. I'm going to talk about where things are with the release of the files and how the White House and the rest of Congress is reacting, because it is unfortunately exactly how you'd expect. But first, make sure that you're following or subscribed to the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new article out just yesterday, all about how Trump has basically told us that AI, or calling something AI, is going to be his new hoax, and why that matters for the rest of us. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. All right, let's get to the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth. With Cozy Earth, you can transform your space, whatever it is, into an elevated haven where serenity and renewal intertwine effortlessly. I really like their bamboo sheets. They keep me cool, especially in these dog days of summer. And I really like their luxe robe. I'm a robe guy. I know, say what you will, but these are about as good as it gets. I'll even avoid planning things on the weekend just to spend a little bit more time in this robe. Now, Cozy Earth's products are a favorite among many celebrities. Kris Jenner praises their bamboo sheets as her nightly essential, raving about their softness and cooling comfort. And for 7 consecutive years, 7, Oprah has included Cozy Earth on her favorite things list, with free shipping on orders over $50, a 100-night sleep trial, and a 10-year warranty. Cozy Earth will bring lasting luxury and comfort into your home. Visit CozyEarth.com and use the exclusive 40% off code for Make It Make Sense, MIMS25. That's MIMS25. It's good for any purchase, and it's the best deal, and it cannot be found anywhere else but here on Make It Make Sense. Now, Make It Make Sense does get a cut of that sale, but, it keeps the show going. It puts you in some new sheets or towels, and it keeps me in my favorite robe. Again, visit CozyEarth.com and use the code MIMS25 for 40% off. Wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth. Okay, let's get back to the show. On Wednesday morning, dozens of the survivors, families of victims, and their lawyers and a bipartisan trio of lawmakers stood in front of the Capitol and pleaded with American leaders to allow the release of the Epstein Files. In those files would be the names of people who knowingly allowed, facilitated, or engaged in the thousands of acts of sex trafficking, abuse, and assault on girls and women at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their friends. They're specifically calling for members of Congress to sign what's called a discharge petition. And I'm going to do this really quickly, but it's important that you know how this works. So in Congress, the Speaker of the House is so powerful because they control which and when bills get put up for a full vote. The current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has blocked the release of the Epstein files or a bill to release those files at almost every turn. So, conservative Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky and liberal Representative from California, Ro Khanna, have partnered up to make what's called a discharge petition. It means that if enough members of the House sign it, the Speaker of the House has to put that bill up for a vote or risk abandoning his duties and potentially losing his job. If it passes, then it would likely go on like any other bill all the way up to the president, where the president would sign it in the end. Now, the bill, if it were signed, prevents the release of any identifying information about the victims, but it does not redact information about the other people in the files unless the government can prove to Congress that there's a good reason for redacting non-victim information. So that's how this would work. And these survivors met at the Capitol to demand that their leaders step up and sign this petition. Many of them asked why their lives and their own safety weren't worth the government protecting them, why Jeffrey Epstein was more important than them, and several of them made direct appeals to Trump. And I'm going to play a few of those now, almost in full because they deserve to not be edited down to a 10-second soundbite, but also because you deserve to hear what they had to say.
Those emails provided the proof that the government worked very hard with Jeffrey Epstein to violate our rights. Why? Why did the government work so hard to protect Jeffrey and not so hard to protect me and my other innocent friends? Why was Jeffrey so important to the government, and why was I so insignificant?
You are a person who has chosen to serve in an elected position to stand up for those you represent who cannot always stand up for themselves. We are those people. We are the Americans that you promised to protect, and we need your help. Please, President Trump, pass this bill and help us. Make us feel like our voices are finally being heard. Thank you.
And then there's this from the brother of Virginia Giuffre, who took her own life after coming forward publicly as a victim of Jeffrey Epstein a few years ago.
Our plea to you, whether you're a dad, a mom, a brother, or a sister, look your young ones in the face. Look them in the eye and tell them you didn't stand against the very people who raped, molested, and preyed upon children and young women. Tell them you were willing to negotiate a deal. Money should never be what makes something right or wrong. If you vote no, your stance will be clear. You will be choosing to stand on the side of the rich and powerful, allowing money to buy your way out of the consequence. But here's my one ask. Look these survivors in the eye and tell them why. Then, look the people of the United States in the eye and tell them why. And then, when you're alone, look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself why.
All of the things that we heard from the survivors were as powerful as that. And in the end, one of the survivors, Anuska DiGiorgio, said, to be clear, the only motive for opposing this bill would be to conceal wrongdoing. And she's right. These files, according to people who are in the White House right now, according to people who are in top law enforcement and justice positions, according to right-wing influencers and podcasters whom the White House gave their phase 1 of the Epstein Files to earlier this year, and according to tens of millions of Americans who voted for Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress, these files contain the names of criminals of the worst kind. And to vote not to release them, by their own logic, would seem to only serve to protect these criminals. But that is exactly what the White House is doing. The White House, meaning Trump directly, has been calling Republican members of Congress, telling them that it would be a hostile act to Donald Trump himself to sign this discharge petition. Here's Thomas Massie talking about it.
Well, I made the mistake of getting 12 co-sponsors, and so the White House knew who to target, so I'm not going to name anybody who's thinking about joining.
But you're confident you'll get the signatures?
I'm pretty sure. I mean, it's a strong effort from the White House. They're literally calling it a hostile act to sign this discharge petition now. And I don't know if that's precedented in this country to have a president call legislators to say that they're engaged in a hostile act, particularly when the so-called hostile act is trying to get justice for people who've been victims of sex crimes.
Yeah, it's pretty wild that the White House would be doing this. It's extremely strange for the White House to be directly lobbying members not to do something as small as this discharge petition. It's not even like it's a bill that they're worried about. And now Massie has been claiming that Trump and powerful donors whose names may or may not be inside the Epstein files are funding ads against him in his run for re-election. Trump has already promised to primary Thomas Massie, who's been outspoken against Trump several times here, including with his big, beautiful bill. But there are other things that Trump is concerned about here, because we got this from one of the survivors about how close Trump and Epstein were and how Epstein saw Trump.
With Ghislaine Maxwell, and Jeffrey and Ghislaine were always very boastful about their friends, their famous or powerful friends, and his biggest brag forever was that he was very good friends with Donald Trump. He had an 8x10 framed picture of him on his desk.
So that's new. That's news, actually. It's insight into how Epstein saw his friend of 20 years. And now there's been a lot of reporting about how close Trump and Epstein were, and there's been even more reporting about Trump covering this up. And I know that sounds crazy, but Trump was told back in May that he was all over the Epstein Files. A whistleblower came forward to senators to say that thousands of FBI agents had been pulled from their crime-fighting work to comb through the Epstein documents to look for Trump's name and then have it redacted. Trump sent his newly former personal attorney in Todd Blanche to do a questionable at best interview with Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, only for her to suddenly and mysteriously be moved to a nicer prison. So you put that all together with Trump now calling members of Congress to keep this stuff concealed, it's pretty hard not to see this as anything other than a government cover-up. There's also one other thing from that survivor you heard just a minute ago, and it's actually what was happening around her. It sounded like there were jets flying overhead during the press conference, because there were. Now, normally the airspace around the Capitol and the White House is restricted, so it's not like that was a Delta flight coming in a little too close for a landing at Reagan Airport. Those were the sounds of jets on their way back from a flyover of the White House that initially, when it went over the first time, shook the press conference microphones. The flyover was for a meeting with the far-right Polish president that Trump was having, in which U.S. fighter jets flew a memorial flight pattern for a Polish fighter pilot who died during a rehearsal for an air show last month. Is it uncommon for flyovers to happen at the White House? Kind of. Not really. Trump likes them. Is it weird, though, that it was in honor of a non-American fighter pilot who wasn't killed in action while being allied with the U.S.? Yes. What it did serve to do was be extremely disruptive to the press conference, which the White House knew was happening at that same time, and at worst, it was intimidating for those people, intentional or not, on the White House's part. But I will say it 100% took me by surprise both times you heard fighter jets. Now, what that does bring us to here is what Trump's actual reaction to this press conference was, because he continues to call the entire Epstein Files story a Democratic made-up hoax. Here's what he said in the Oval Office as the press conference was happening.
So this is a Democrat hoax that never ends. You know, it reminds me a little of the Kennedy situation. We gave him everything over and over again, more and more and more, and nobody's ever satisfied. From what I understand, I could check, but from what I understand, thousands of pages of documents have been given. But it's really a Democrat hoax, because they're trying to get people to talk about something that's totally irrelevant to the success.
Irrelevant. That's what Trump thinks about the women who came forward, about the families who've lost loved ones who couldn't bear the pain of their abuse anymore, about the own beliefs of his voters who voted for him, believing he would be their savior and the exposer of evil among America's elites. Now, I will say that this hasn't been a super popular response among the MAGA crowd. Representative from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is an ultra-conservative, hyper-Trump supporter, went on the very conservative far-right outlet Real America's Voice to criticize Trump.
Today he called it a hoax while these women were speaking out, and they were saying, we're not a hoax. We're human beings. And, well, I just want to finish up on one thing. Yeah. It's not a hoax because Jeffrey Epstein is a convicted pedophile. That takes away the whole hoax things. It's not a hoax. It's not a lie. And on that note, Eric, every Republican should be able to sign on to this. And that's the real hoax, that they're afraid to sign on to it.
Now, Greene isn't known for doing this kind of thing. She's been about as die-hard for Trump as you can get, so her breaking like this is shocking. She is also a co-sponsor of the bill to release the Epstein Files, along with 10 other Republicans and 39 other Democrats. But I do need to say that Trump is right about one thing here. The House Oversight Committee did release 34 roughly 1,000 pages of Epstein documents the day before survivors spoke. Now, I looked through a lot of these, like thousands of these images, and so have a lot of other reporters. And what we all found was that these pages are kind of a big nothing. They were so redacted that they're nearly impossible to make heads or tails of, and the things that you could read in them were things we already knew. So releasing these documents was basically a smokescreen, a cover-up for Congress to say, actually, we did release the files, and like Trump said, some people will just never be satisfied. It's why Mike Johnson is still saying things like Republicans are committed to transparency and justice on Epstein, while also saying the discharge petition is going to fail and being fine with that. And right now, it looks like Johnson is right, because as I'm recording, there are just 4 Republicans who have signed on to this petition. Massey, Green, Colorado's Lauren Boebert, and South Carolina's Nancy Mace, who is a sexual assault survivor herself. Now, Mace is interesting, and I want to focus on her for a second here. Mace left a meeting with the survivors on Tuesday early because, according to her, she had a full-blown panic attack during the meeting and left in tears. And that is awful. I want to be very clear about that nobody should have to live with that kind of pain or relive that kind of trauma, because it should never have happened in the first place. Mace, however, the very next day, after the survivors spoke, Mace was not, as far as I could tell, at the press conference, and Trump had called these women and their pain a hoax. She turned around and defended Trump, posting online, "President Trump is the one who banned Jeffrey Epstein from Mar-a-Lago. President Trump is the one who cooperated with the feds to get this guy. President Trump is the one who is committed to protecting women and kids." Now, when she says that Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, that's true. He only did that, however, after Trump said that Epstein, in Trump's words, stole an underage worker from Mar-a-Lago, essentially trafficking her out of Trump's resort. That woman was Virginia Dufresne, who took her own life very recently. When Mace says that Trump worked with the feds, she means that Trump gave helpful information to the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein in 2009 that eventually led to a non-prosecution deal for Epstein. So there weren't really high stakes because Trump likely already knew that was going to happen. And for her to say that it's Trump who's standing with women and children after he called their pain irrelevant, I think it's a pretty hard pill to swallow. Now, Mace is still a co-sponsor of the Epstein bill and the petition. She's also running for governor in South Carolina right now, so she's not risking losing her congressional seat by breaking with Trump in the way that she's trying to do here, because she can't run for both her seat and governor at the same time. Essentially, she's trying to have it both ways. A champion for survivors, but a sycophant for Trump to get his endorsement because he has so much power within the Republican Party. And she's not alone. Essentially, every other member of Congress who is refusing to sign on to this petition wants this both ways, which is why the petition looks like it's going to fail. These members of Congress want to say they're doing enough to get justice for these victims, to take down the elites, but only as long as it lets them stay out of Trump's way. And the question is now, is how long are their voters going to let them do that before they face real consequences? We are not that far away from the next election. Races are already being run. How long will it be before voters force their lawmakers to keep their promises on these files and to hold people accountable who are in them? Because it really seems like right now that's the only way these files are going to get released, is if we, as voters, force them to do that, or force our leaders to face the consequences of not doing it the next time that we go to vote. All right. That is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening today. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're listening to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month. And share the show on social media. It's Mims Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.